please just be mindful of the pace at which you speak, and try to speak slowly, avoiding acronyms and technical and scientific language. All right, so with that said, I do want to just turn it over to Renee briefly to ground us in a land acknowledgement.
Klasukamati omito, klasukamati atatonatiu, klasukamati tanantuklali, klasukamati abuelitos, the abuelitas, and all the ones that came before and all the little ones to come. We live on the land of the Ute, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Lakota, the Navajo, the Apache, the Chicano, and 48 tribes that live and travel through the space. I ask that you remember this in modern identity to be good ancestors for all of us living in Colorado and the need for true equity. And what does that look like to work with it for disproportionately impacted communities and authentic justice? So thank you for acknowledging that we are all on stolen land, no treaties were ever honored, and we have to legitimately work from not just dismantling what the system is broken, but it's working as designed to create a lot of targeting and disproportion. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee. All right, and so again, before we dive into the agenda, I wanted to turn it over to Beatriz, one of our co-chairs, to do a quick roll call of the folks who are here.
Lumna, I just lost my window.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. Would you mind doing that? I'm on one screen today and I don't have a mouse, so
I can help.
Thank you, Renee.
I got you. It's all good. I'm on the screen. Arthur Ortegon. No, Arthur. Beatriz.
Present.
Thank you. Doug Dean.
Here.
Thank you, Doug. Ian Tafoya. Elizabeth Schroeder. Here. Thank you, Elizabeth. Gary Arnold.
Here, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Hilda Nusete. Maybe later. Jamie Valdez.
Here.
Or Jaime Valdez, forgive me.
That's okay.
Thank you, Jaime. Jordan Beasley. Kimberly Mendoza Cook.
Hey, I'm here.
Thank you, Kimberly. Marcia Nelson.
Renee, I apologize, she's here. She just joined us through the waiting room, so she may have not heard you call on her.
Oh, just kidding. Here, I'll come back. Mira Fickling.
Present.
Forgive me, sorry, Mira. Trisha Oe.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you, Trisha. Tyson Johnston.
I'm here.
Thank you, Tyson. And I'll go back. Marcia Nelson. And if you also want to put it in the chat, if there's any audio issues too, Marcia, please.
It looks like she was just getting her audio connected. You might want to try again.
Like.
Marcia, are you able to hear us okay?
Yes.
I got the yes. So that was everybody. Thank you, Marcia. But also let us know if you have audio issues too.
Thank you, Renee. So to start our meeting here today, we wanted to do a grounding exercise and kind of share who we're accountable to and why we're here today. So I'm happy to start and model this, and maybe again a quick presentation of your name and yeah. So my name is Beatriz Soto, and I am the representative of of Congressional District 3. of disproportionately impacted communities. And today I present myself being accountable to the Latinx community, the Black community, the Indigenous community. I am also accountable to my family, to my son. I am accountable to low-income community members and disproportionately impacted members of Congressional District 3 in Colorado. And I can kind of popcorn around, and this will help us kind of lay the day for today. I'll go ahead and call on Trisha, sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Beatrice. So I'm Trisha Oath. I am here on the task force as Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's representative with a background in water quality. Who am I accountable to? I mean, everything what you said, Beatrice, really resonates with me, and I don't want to be too general because my response really is, you know, working at CDPHE and working for the state government. To me, it means public service, and that has always been like the guiding light and the reason behind, you know, what I'm doing. And so always feel really accountable to all of the people of Colorado. You know, it is a service position, a service role, and a service commitment. So I am accountable to all of you and to all who are listening and to all who live, work, and play here.
Let's go. Do you want a popcorn or do you want me to popcorn, Trisha?
Oh, well, you know what, for the sake of it, let's let you off the hook, and we'll each popcorn from here. So I will popcorn to Mira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mira Fickling. I represent an organization that carries out initiatives related to environmental justice. I work with Western Resource Advocates as a policy analyst. And I would say that first and foremost, I'm accountable to my community. I'm accountable to my community in Denver, where I live. I'm accountable to communities in the state of Colorado. And I'm accountable to people both present and future, including future generations that will be impacted by climate change. And I forgot to popcorn, so I will do that. Popcorning to Emily.
I am not a member of the task force, so I will popcorn it to a member unless you want me to. I'll just say I'm an attorney in the Colorado AG's office, and I am accountable to the public, like Trisha said, but also to the rule of law. And I will popcorn to Jorge.
Saludos. I work with the city of Denver as a community partnerships administrator. I'm also with the Environmental Justice Advisory Board. I'm here in my capacity just as a interested policy data wonk on equity. I am accountable to my family. I'm accountable to the people that I serve in Denver, especially the under-resourced communities, the vulnerable population of Denver, that my office is mandated to help make resilient to what's coming with climate change. I'm accountable to myself also. I think that's also really important, to be true to yourself. Nice to meet you.
I'll go ahead and popcorn it to to another task force member, if y'all don't mind. Jaime.
Thank you, Beatriz. My name is Jaime Valdez. I live in Pueblo, Colorado, and I'm a community organizer for Mothers Out Front, which is a mother-led, mother-founded climate justice organization. And we work toward the goal of a livable climate for all children. So based on that, I would say I am accountable to families and future generations all over Colorado, but specifically in my community. I was appointed to this task force as a representative of people of color, which is to say oftentimes disproportionately impacted people. So my community, for example, Pueblo, Colorado, is nearly 50% Latino and or Indigenous. And we definitely see disparate health impacts here that largely affect that portion of our community, but also the larger community. And so I feel I'm accountable to the people of color that I was appointed to represent, but also to my greater community, to the workers here. Pueblo is a union town, very proud of being a union town, and I come from a union family and am currently a union member. And so I definitely see that I have accountability to workers. But again, I was appointed to this task force specifically to represent people of color. And unfortunately, in my community, the larger percentage of people of color are being impacted by pollution from industries that don't necessarily benefit them. So, and I'm very much accountable to myself. I think that was a very excellent point to make. And I'm accountable to my kids and grandkids and future generations of mine, and all of ours, everyone throughout Colorado, I feel accountable to.
I'm going to pass it on to Doug.
I'm Doug Dean, Director of the PUC. Like everyone, we're all accountable to our families. As my position, I'm accountable to the ratepayers of the state of Colorado to ensure that their customers of investor-owned utilities have just and reasonable rates consistent with our social values of our state.
Gary, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Beatrice. My name's Gary Arnold, and much like everybody said, accountable to my family, and I get the opportunity to serve on the Air Quality Control Commission. So I think that's important to note that it is public service, and there's some accountability to everybody that enjoys the state of Colorado. My full-time job is business manager of Denver Pipefitters Local 208. So certainly accountable to the 1,800 members here at this local. I got the opportunity to be elected as our district vice president at our international convention this past summer. And so accountable to every UA member in the 11 Western states. And on this specific task force, I was appointed to represent disproportionately impacted workers. And so I think that's important that we acknowledge the workers that exist in our state, but all of the aspects. So their health, their safety, as well as the economic impacts. We should be accountable to all those folks that are trying to be successful, support themselves and their families. So I think this is an excellent exercise and great way to start the meeting, and appreciate whoever came up with the idea. And I will go to Kimberly.
Thanks, Gary, and I apologize for everyone. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm losing my voice. Kimberly Mendoza Cook, I was appointed to represent disproportionately impacted communities from CD7. And, as Beatrice started us with, it's really the accountability for the community and making sure that the voices are heard and represented as part of this task force. Also, first and foremost for me, my son and my family, of course, as everyone has said, as our future, being accountable to our future and the young people, and really having them look to us to try to hold ourselves accountable, as some others have said as well. Also, as a mentor and as a leader in business, I really feel like it's important for me to be a mentor and be accountable to young women and others who are looking to me to be accountable to them and be someone that they can look to and call to. So thank you. I really enjoyed this exercise too. So thank you all for thinking of it.
Tyson, can you go next? Are you, there you are.
Happy to. Sorry, I'm in the process of picking up my children from school. So, but I will first off start. My name is Tyson Johnston. I was appointed as a representative of the oil and gas industry. I specifically work for a natural gas company, and I held myself accountable really to the entire world. I mean, we are in a place that is growing in population. I am a massive culprit of that with my 4 children, and finding out ways that we can advance as a society while also cleaning ourselves up is a true necessity to the human race. And what my main goal has been with my work that I've done outside of industry is to ensure that we can find ways to do that without having major adverse impacts on lower income, especially people of color, especially the Black and brown community. I think that has been something that historically has been left, and the inability to make change without putting the burden on those who can least afford it is something that's been a problem throughout history. And so my goal has always been, how can we make our energy more affordable? How can we make our energy cleaner? And how can we give those who have not had opportunities to create generational wealth opportunities? And that is my why, my internal why. That's why I'm here. But again, I think it's the accountability really lies in the whole planet. The science shows it. You can't just send, all your polluting factories over to China and expect the environment to get better. It's not going to happen. So we all know that we can be leaders in this, but we must find ways to do it that we don't make the poor poorer and the rich richer. It's got to be a balanced situation, and it's got to be something that allows others to make opportunities for themselves. And I have no idea where we're at on the list. I know I'm one of the last, but if you haven't gone yet, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Tyson. I'll go ahead and call on Elizabeth. You haven't gone yet.
Thanks, Beatrice. I'm Elizabeth Goder. I'm the Department of Natural Resources representative on this task force, representing the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and who I'm accountable to. What Tricia said really resonated. Working for a state agency, I feel that I'm accountable to all Coloradans, and our work should support and do better for everyone that lives in Colorado. And also to take from what Mira said as well, to present and future generations. I feel that I'm accountable to them as well. And I will turn it back to you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Renee.
Hello, I'm accountable like everybody else to my family, to my children who I'm picking up on the reading today, to my community, the spiritual community that I've been asked to hold. I've been dancing all my life as a danzante, and even as a woman that holds a smoke. Last night, I'm actually almost throughout my because I didn't stick up for
Renee, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We heard from our interpreter that she's having a hard time hearing you, and I think we maybe hear some wind in the background. So I don't know if you could sort of try again, but we just heard that she couldn't interpret.
Oh, can you hear me now? So I'm trying to get in a spot that's not as windy.
That's better.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm accountable to my family, my spiritual community, the communities that I've been asked to hold to. I'm a teacher as well too. I've been accountable to future generations. What does that look like with respect to them? And understanding knowledge, not just intelligence, to really know and something that they can't take from you. And then I'm responsible to how I conduct myself in the present time as an ancestor now too. that there are transformations and changes that are responsibilities that as a mother and in all those roles I'm expected to hold, but with grace too. I'm not alone. So I'm accountable to the network of my community, and I hope that I know when to be strong at the same time as I know when to be humble with humility.
Thank you, Renee. I think we have everybody, but Uni just joined our meeting as well. She's not on this task force, but I mean on the committee, the subcommittee, but she is a part of the task force. So do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Uni, and maybe mention who you are accountable to?
I was hoping to be a silent listener, but that's okay. I'm Uni Blake. In full disclosure, I work for the American Petroleum Institute, which means I work for industry. And I was appointed to the task force as a toxicologist. Now, who am I accountable to? So I feel accountable to the very similar to Tyson, the communities where the industry operates, which means nearly everybody, folks that drive cars, folks that use, oil, folks that live near our operations. So it's a wide gamut of people that toxicology impacts. But I'm also accountable to my kids. I have 5 children, and I feel accountable to each one of them to be a good role model, to be a good representation of, how collaboration works. And that's kind of my theme with my kids. So I'm just here to listen to your conversation. So I probably will stay silent for most of it. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Uni, for joining us today. And I have not missed anybody, correct? Has everybody gone from the Environmental Justice Action Task Force? Okay, so I'm going to do a really quick recap of what we haven't met in a while. Our last the last meeting of this subcommittee was a while back, a little bit over a month. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of what we spoke about in our last meeting. So we had a presentation from Charles Lee, and he was sharing the work that the EPA Region 8 is doing in terms of cumulative impacts and analysis at a federal level. He shared how other states are doing some of this work, what works, what doesn't work. He gave us a really big overview of all of that. And we had a really interesting conversation amongst ourselves around quantitative data, trauma sensitivity, decision, and when community is involved in decision-making of their involvement prior to permitting. We had a very extended conversation about that. And then also ensuring that the information we're collecting and the cumulative impact has also relevance in rural communities. This for me was really important. I'm part of a disproportionately impacted community in rural Colorado in Garfield County. So that was a big part of our discussion. We also had Anna McDevitt from the Sierra Club, and she shared cumulative impact analysis and the equity components of it from like an advocacy nonprofit standpoint, and how what factors that she looked into. And she shared that her work has been more specifically around coal power plants in the Denver metro area, and shared a little bit about their learnings and their journeys of doing that analysis. We also got an update from Joel, where he was, we tasked them to please scope kind of the decision-making within the different agencies, and kind of share that out with all of us of like, how are the decisions, who are the decision makers, and how these agencies interact with each other. So we heard a little bit of that. And I think, Joel, remind me, we got everybody to answer that, right? Were we still, I don't remember if we were still waiting for some responses, or we were going to get any updates from that. But that was basically the big kind of overarching themes that we had in our last meeting. So today we have a pretty lengthy agenda, and Joel is going to be leading a lot of these conversations. It's great to have Joel and his previous experience kind of update us on the EPA Suncor plant. with the Title V objection letter. So he's going to walk us through kind of that, what that means and that process. And then we're also going to learn a little bit about the Title VI disproportionate impact analysis, correct, Joel, from the civil rights movement. And then those are going to be like our two big themes, and then there's going to be an opportunity for discussion where we will be reviewing and discussing the draft recommendations that Lubna has been so gracefully collecting from all our conversations that impact this subcommittee. And we saw them briefly in our last meeting on April 23rd, but we're going to dive a little deeper today into discussion on the ones that impact this subcommittee specifically. And then the last half hour, we're going to allow for public comment. So I guess from here, we will allow you to take it away, Joel. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatriz. And I do have some slides that I'll go through. I'm not going to spend much time on them. There's not much there, but I'll be kind of using some words and phrases that might be easier to see written out on your screen. So just wanted to flag that before I got started. So as Beatriz mentioned, kind of both of the topics that I'll be going over really are things that we started a conversation about during the full task force meeting last week, both of which are things that are happening within CDPHE that are really relevant to the work of this subcommittee. And so we want to just make sure everyone has kind of all the information we shared last week, and then kind of tee that up for a more detailed discussion within the subcommittee as part of your work on thinking about recommendations on these topics. So first is, as we discussed last week, we have received a letter from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA for its initials in English, about the Title V air pollution permit for the Suncor refinery. And for those of you who have not seen the term, it can often be a bit of a word salad, but Title V refers to the section of the Federal Clean Air Act that covers air quality permits. So as we discussed last week, there is one kind of technical objection that led EPA to make send the letter to us, but they also attached to the letter a pretty detailed set of recommendations on environmental justice topics. And as we discussed, one of those topics is really related to the work of this subcommittee, which is talking about doing an analysis of cumulative air impacts. So that analysis is something that you all can probably weigh in on, because it relates to sort of both an equity analysis and the piece of your work on cumulative impacts. So we'd like to see today if you have sort of impacts on what this type of cumulative impact analysis should look like, and also how this type of recommendation might fit within sort of the broader work of the task force on making recommendations about cumulative impacts and equity analyses. I'm going to just kind of share my screen. This is actually the full text of EPA's recommendation to us. I think it's a lot of words, but it's just enough to fit on one slide. I will go ahead and read it out loud, which I know isn't a best practice, but that'll kind of give everyone time to kind of process and digest the words. So EPA urges CDPHE to, in conjunction with stakeholders, expedite the comprehensive analysis and ensure that the analysis includes the preparation of a cumulative air impacts assessment and identification of specific actions that can be taken to mitigate such impacts. EPA recommends that the analysis include cumulative air impacts associated with emissions from all emission units at the Suncor facility, and that I lost my place, fugitive emissions from the facility, emissions from nearby industrial facilities and transportation, provide a more complete assessment of the cumulative ambient air impacts of the facility on this community. And so for those of you who maybe don't work on air quality issues every day, I'll just pause and say that this seems to be a list of many different sources of emissions or pollution that can go into the air. Really a recommendation to think about the emissions or pollution from all of those sources together comprehensively in one analysis. So consistent with the state's environmental justice policies, this is EPA referencing things like the Environmental Justice Act and the work that we're doing here in the task force, and its acknowledgement that the Commerce City, North Denver area is impacted by multiple sources of pollution that include Suncor. And I think that's important. You know, Suncor is not the only source of pollution. And I think EPA is encouraging us to think cumulatively about many sources of pollution in the area that cumulatively impact air, water, and soil. EPA recommends that CDPHE consider expanding the analysis to potential impacts from other pathways of exposure. Such an analysis would help to illustrate the direct link between the environmental burdens in this community and the health of its residents. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we can kind of open it up for discussion among you all now. But I think a key aspect there is that EPA seems to be getting at a lot of what you all were discussing on Saturday. I think in the discussion of the recommendations and cumulative impacts of whether there could be value in just doing something like a broader cumulative impact study that looks maybe across media, so air, water, and soil, lots of different sources of pollution within a priority disproportionately impacted community like Commerce City, North Denver. So just interesting to see the synergies there, and I will turn it to the task force members to see if you have ideas that you want to discuss about the recommendation and also what it means for your work and the recommendations that you're shaping.
I just want to note that the slides that Joel just reviewed, I dropped the link to in the chat. That should be viewable by everybody, and it might be helpful for folks to reference slide 2, which kind of provides an overview, and slide 3, which provides the explanation that Joel just read through, if people want to kind of take a moment to process that.
Lubna, while people are processing, we actually had our second interpreter join us, so maybe we can do a quick test. Maria Elisa, I'm going to go to the Spanish channel and just make sure I can hear you. So one moment. Sí, te escucho. Thank you. We can hear you. Thank you all for the pause there.
I mean, I can give my kind of first reaction is like, I applaud the EPA for requiring this, working really closely with Olga that came and spoke at our last meeting, and with Cultivando. We work with them quite a bit. It's very refreshing to see that they're starting to see Suncor not just as its unique source of pollution, but that there are multiple sources of pollution, and what that the whole industry and that the cumulative impacts in that community is so much more than this one plant. So I guess from that standpoint, I find this refreshing and encouraging, and I think the recommendations, like you said, Joel, are very in line with what we are tasked to look at, the impacts on land, air, and water as well. So I applaud this effort, and I'm excited to see what the analysis, how it comes out. And then I guess especially from a standpoint of the community and talking about those stakeholders, really seeing who those stakeholders are and making sure that community is part of those stakeholders, and that the information is also presented in a way that the community really understands it and it's not super technical and jargoned. I'm curious to see how the analysis is also going to be presented to that group of stakeholders.
Well, I didn't expect to jump in early in the conversation, but just maybe to keep things going. Thanks for your thoughts, Beatriz. So from CDPHE's perspective, just would offer, we're also really excited about, the comments and the partnership here. That I know, there were kind of two pieces to what Joel read on that slide and in that comment from EPA, which are similar to the conversation that we had on Saturday, in that there's at least two ways to look at an equity analysis or a cumulative impact analysis. And I know there are many more than two, but they sort of highlight the need to look at the cumulative impacts from multiple sources on a community. And then they also look at or speak to looking at the cumulative impacts from multiple environmental media. And we talked about sort of the challenges of, duplication and consistency, jurisdiction, and things like that, and how do you operationalize that? In terms of the first of those approaches, I know that the Air Division has already been planning on standing up a way to look at cumulative impacts from air quality from multiple sources in the community around Suncor. So that is something that's underway. I think there's just a real need to do that, and that is certainly recognized and shared from CDPHE's perspective as well. But it'll be great to hear, more thoughts from folks, as we do undertake that assessment and scope it out, and to your point, Beatrice, figure out how to share that information in a straightforward kind of way is going to be really important.
Don't see anyone else jumping in with thoughts, but Mira, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, just to add to this discussion, I'm just recalling the presentation that we had from Charles Lee from the EPA last session, and one of the aspects that he highlighted of the cumulative impact / equity analysis is the need to engage the community in what impacts the community finds to be the most important or the most pressing, and it seems to me that that is a great place to start in this case, particularly given the extremely active community engagement on Suncor to date. That the best place to start is, what are the most pressing environmental impacts that they are feeling in their communities today, and then start there.
Thank you, Mira. I think that's a really great suggestion, and I really appreciate you tying it back to what we've already learned from Charles Lee in the previous meeting. That's really important to keep in mind as we work on this. So maybe I'll move on to the next thing that I'm going to talk about, and we don't have to have a deep discussion of each of these topics as I bring them up, because both of them are really just reminding us of things that have to or could be a part of the task force's broader recommendations, which is what we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting talking about. So, these can both just be topics to keep in mind as you go into the discussion later. We don't have to do the full discussion now. So I will share my screen again. I do briefly have some slides to help contextualize this. Once again, is something that we talked a little bit about on last week's meeting, I think in response to a question that we got. So we didn't have much prepared, but I do want to provide a little more background material and explain why this is relevant to the work of this subcommittee. So confusingly, I'm now going to talk about Title VI, even though I just talked about Title V. It might seem like I'm talking about two laws that are like right next to each other or are related. They're actually not. So Title V, as we just discussed, is part of the Federal Clean Air Act. When we talk about Title VI, we're actually talking about Title VI of a totally different law, the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. So folks are probably more familiar with other parts of that law, like Title IX that relates to gender equity, Title VII that relates to employment protections. But we're going to talk about Title VI, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin by anyone who receives money from the federal government. So as the state government here in Colorado, we, CDPHE, receive a lot of funding from the state government. So these requirements apply to us. They also apply to local governments and tribal governments and some private entities that also receive federal funding. So one way to ensure that there is not discrimination happening on the basis of race is to conduct what's called a disparate impact analysis before making a decision, to just check and see if there's a possibility that a decision that seems neutral on its face, right? No one intended it to be discriminatory, could still have a disparate impact on who's impacted negatively by the result of the decision on the basis of race. So, I think I'll just say maybe just textbook or classic example of what this might look like is there's a decision to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall, which is really important for the climate. And maybe there's a regulation that sets up something like a cap and trade system or something, but it doesn't really look at where the emissions are being reduced. So if it turns out that the first places to reduce their emissions and decrease pollution or maybe shut down a power plant are all in wealthier, affluent, whiter communities, and the companies that keep operating or maybe operate more, perhaps they buy some credits under the cap and trade scheme, are in a community of color, that facially neutral decision to reduce greenhouse gas emissions could have this unintended consequence that results in a disparate impact on the basis of race. So that's kind of an academic example. That's one I've heard in kind of academic concepts, but I just wanted to share that to kind of contextualize what we're talking about here. I think the important thing to note that is that a disparate impact is not intentional discrimination, but Title VI covers both intentional discrimination and unintentional decisions that still result in a disproportionate impact on a community of color. So I think that leads to some questions. We at CDPHE are working, as always, to ensure that we comply with Title VI of the Federal Civil Rights Act. And though there's no specific requirement to conduct a disparate impacts analysis necessarily for all decisions, it's something that the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has talked about a lot. And EPA at some point in the near future has said that it will be releasing some guidance for states that may include things like doing a disparate impact analysis. So as part of our broader work to ensure compliance with Title VI in partnership with EPA, we did want to bring that to this subcommittee to talk about a couple questions. And one is kind of how a disparate impact analysis could be the same as, or maybe different than an equity analysis, what you all are thinking about, where Title VI compliance, so doing things like a disparate impact analysis to ensure that there is no disparate impact on the basis of race, where that fits within the task force's recommendations on the equity analysis, and maybe even potentially a recommendation that one thing an equity analysis could be is the same as a disparate impact analysis, sort of using the same process to both ensure equity in our decisions and also ensure that there isn't a disparate impact on the basis of race. It gets back to what Dr. Davis is always, I think, encouraging us to think about, which is not always using a deficits framing, but using a benefits framing, right? And in many ways, I think an equity analysis uses more of a benefits framing. How are we ensuring everyone has the same resources? Whereas a disparate impact analysis is more of the deficit framing of sort of looking at who is more impacted and is there a difference on the basis of race? And then finally, in planning for this meeting with our co-chairs, Renee and Beatriz, talked a lot about sort of how trauma sensitivity and cultural sensitivity could sort of play into this analysis. I think anytime we talk about a disproportionate impact on the basis of race or national origin, it's easy to kind of use that deficits framework and go about it in a way that maybe isn't sensitive to the trauma or lived experience of a community. And so we wanted to make sure that that's part of the discussion here. So that, I will pause and stop sharing my screen and just see if any task force members want to weigh in with ideas or suggestions or thoughts that came up as I was talking through that.
Well, just to make another plug for input on this, I will just say, again, we're embarking on this review of, best compliance, best program for compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act with EPA, and, in looking at, what are the best ways to do a disparate impact analysis. I am really excited about the opportunity to get input from this task force. I think the timing is great. So any thoughts that folks have, whether it's now in this subcommittee meeting or afterwards, on how should the state of Colorado and CDPHE in particular do disparate impact analyses is something that we're very much interested in.
Kind of based on your comment, thank you, Tricia, is I'm thinking also like how can we standardize it, and so different agencies can speak the same language, so it's not looking at different factors or going through different processes. I think that's really important, and then it also allows us as a community member to not have to learn different processes from different agencies, because sometimes that is very overburdensome when you have working class community members having to learn these systems is hard enough. But then when each agency operates different, or they have different definitions for different things, it makes it so complicated. And that for me is what's also really exciting about this process, and what we're doing collectively to make sure that it's all standardized across these different agencies and departments.
I wanted to jump in. Oh,
Go ahead.
thank you, Doug. I wanted to jump in really quick because it's also recognizing that there's not these systems for our communities, and that we're very much organic. There's already an impact. There's already been an impact. So it also makes state and federal agencies not hide behind bureaucracy, but legitimately start seeing things with, again, the sensitivity and context for action. What does it look like to not just have these communities consult or recommend, but legitimately implement what is going to be most effective for them to do something about it too? And this is a recognition of equity that's not there, but it's also a recognition of data that we can start helping to learn with context of the degradation to the environment and all the elements in cumulative impact. So I hope that a lot, when we talk about these big concepts of cultural sensitivity and trauma sensitivity, that it's actually seen more for the living communities that are already impacted, and what does it look like to react to them in a more responsive way to their cultural identity and their traumas that they've already been through.
And I was just going to say, I don't know, first of all, if I really understand the difference between an equity analysis and the other analysis you were talking about. But when it comes to equity analysis, just in talking to staff, one thing that we're just kind of concerned about is if there is like one definition for what an equity analysis looks like for all agencies, it just may not fit well with all different agencies. What CDPHE does for an equity analysis might not work for the PUC for a number of different reasons. So I wanted to throw that out there, that that maybe it's best to leave that for example, for us, the PUC, we deal with that in a rulemaking.
Well, and I think one of the things is a lot of our recommendations are going to require them to go through a full rulemaking anyways in many of these agencies as it is.
I'll try to fill the silence to kind of respond and see if there are kind of other thoughts or if we're ready to move on to the next part of the discussion. But I think those are all really important suggestions. So Beatrice's suggestion that we ensure the work we do is accessible to communities and understandable and makes sense and can be found and understood is really critical. It's easy, especially in a complex legal concept, right? Like a disparate impact analysis to quickly get into things that are incomprehensible. So I think that's really great feedback in thinking about how we're communicating. To Renee's point, I think ensuring that there's sort of an action focus and that the disparate impact analysis, I think to paraphrase Renee, it's not just analyzing, but also is tied to sort of what we would do to address a disparate impact. For example, if it's identified, I think that's a really good reminder. And Doug, I think it's also a great reminder that what makes sense for one agency might not make sense for others, right? The type of impact that could be experienced from a PUC decision is different than the type of impact that could often be experienced from a CDPHE decision. And I'm actually not sure off the top of my head whether the Public Utilities Commission receives federal funding. So it might not be thinking about this so much in a Title VI mindset as a just purely an equity analysis mindset. And so I think that's an important consideration for the task force as you shape your recommendations that could apply to different agencies. Is even if agencies that receive federal funds like CDPHE or CDOT are also thinking about Title VI compliance in this context, that might not make sense for agencies like the Department of Natural Resources and the Public Utilities Commission. So thanks for the idea there.
Yeah, the PUC does receive federal funds for the pipeline safety program, but that's about it.
Go ahead and jump in. Yeah, I guess I'll reflect a little bit of Doug's confusion. I'm not sure if I fully understand the distinction between the disparate impacts analysis and the equity analysis. I guess it seems to me that like some of the things that we're considering as part of the disparate impact analysis do have to do with disparate distribution of benefits as well as disparate distribution of harm. So for example, like in the cap and trade example, what we're really talking about is, concentration of emissions reductions and where those emissions reductions are located, and the possibility that those emissions reductions won't be located in the communities that need them the most. And that that seems really important to me. But I guess jumping off of Renee's point, I really see this as, almost another form of accountability for agency decisions. Because I think, in the abstract, a lot of us have the vague sense that, the decisions that we make in these agencies, particularly around climate change policy, have huge impacts on the communities in which facilities are regulated, and could have significant benefits to those communities if they cause the regulated facilities to emit less pollution, to clean up their act. But it's easy without a real analysis of how these decisions are affecting those communities. It's really easy at the end of the day to leave those by the wayside, or to consider them as secondary. And I see this requirement for an equity analysis or a disparate impacts analysis as really providing accountability and highlighting what the impacts on these communities are, and providing, I guess, yet another resource to the communities themselves, for one thing, to be able to advocate for better policies, to be able to advocate for harm reduction, and also just making plain, what we're really talking about when we're talking about climate policy and when we're talking about these decisions. So, in that sense, I just really want to echo what Renee said about the necessity of these analyses, but also the necessity of acting on these analyses and incorporating them into decision making.
I think I saw Gary had his hand up. Did you want to say anything, Gary?
Yeah, you know, I just, you know, I want to make sure we're getting all these things right, and you know, as we kind of go through the thought process, typically what I do is end up trying to relate it to something that I'm familiar with. And in this case, you know, my experience as you know, as a training director and running our registered apprenticeship program, we kind of tried to address the same challenges. In our case, you know, those regs come from 29 CFR 30, which kind of governs, you know, how you accept people, making sure you're providing equity and fairness to everybody trying to gain career potential. What a lot of times you'll do, you know, some kind of skills test or you know, some kind of analysis, right, for anybody applying for the program. And in that world, you know, we do validity studies, and it's exactly like your presentation, right? What we're trying to do is just determine somebody's skill set, if they're going to be a good, in our case, a pipe fitter, right? And on the surface, that shouldn't be any kind of, you know, discrimination. It's just skills. They don't really care where you come from or what you look like. But that process requires us to go back and look and see, do any of those barriers, do any of those kind of tests create an adverse impact on any particular group? And whether you intended to do it or not, if it shows up, then it's a clear highlight that you need to adjust that and make sure that you aren't having that adverse impact on any particular protected group. So while an equity analysis, you know, has some overlap, in my opinion, you know, because that does ensure in some ways that you're running an equitable process, that doesn't change the fact that in our case, on that as an example, or my experience, doesn't change the fact that you need to go out and make targeted recruitment efforts for particular groups that maybe don't know about you or are underrepresented in that program. And so I think, you know, that's how I'm trying to relate, where I think there's specific cases where an equity analysis makes sense. There's also specific cases where a desperate analysis makes sense, because they somewhat at times accomplish two different things. But as we have conversations, I'm sensitive to like Doug and Tricia and Robin from Saturday's meeting, is because ultimately, you know, we need to come up with strong recommendations that capture all these conversations on our overall goals, but deliver something that's an actionable process. The various departments or divisions are going to have to find a way to take what we're trying to accomplish and turn it into a workable process that people feel is fair. And so, you know, that's really where I'm struggling, is try to figure out, well, how do we start getting kind of the meat and potatoes into what we're trying to develop, right? What does an actual equity analysis look like? What does a desperate analysis look like? What scenarios do we want to see them accomplish? And I agree with Beatrice that the more we can keep things the same, I think the better, because it's hard, you know, when we engage in various, you know, whether it be at the PUC or any other department, you know, we're trying to learn, you know, those kind of specialized processes. It does make it more difficult. But I'd also want to acknowledge the fact that there's a reason why they're different at the different, you know, departments or divisions, because they're doing different things, and we need to make sure it actually works in each one of those individual processes.
Renee, please go ahead. I guess I'm kind of facilitating a little bit, but folks don't need to wait for me to come off mute. Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, love. Honestly, it's also learning while we go. This doesn't exist, or else our coalitions or the different forms of this perspective when it needs to be needed as a form of equity. So it's not just waiting for what it looks like, but also learning that trial and error of where community can already fill in. That's what their recommendations are a lot for going forward. Even as I was discussing earlier, reaching out to community in ways that later we were talking about a jam board that can legitimately get their ideas and start seeing how we can implement it as we go. What does it look like to not just have these recommendations, but something we can act on? Because it's not just the equity analysis, it's the actual implementation that's a whole other process in and of itself too for forms of equity. And if we still get caught up on the status quo of discussing council and recommendations, we're never going to go anywhere with any implementation anytime soon.
Thanks, Renee. And I think your point there is in some ways the answer to Mira and Doug's confusion on what is a disparate impact analysis and what is an equity analysis and how are they different. And I think you're right that we don't have a lot of examples of either, right? That this is fairly new territory in a lot of ways. There are things that are somewhat similar, you know, the documents that the Lumna shared with you during our first subcommittee meeting, right, that have been mostly prepared in other states and are more focused on other contexts, right? Maybe analyzing environmental justice impacts under the National Environmental Policy Act, for example. So, you know, the short answer to the confusion of how are they different or the same is we don't know, right? Where it's a new territory. And I think you all get a powerful voice in shaping that as the task force and trying to parse, you know, ultimately, if you make recommendations that certain agencies should conduct an equity analysis for certain purposes, you know, is that the same as a disparate impact analysis those agencies might be conducting under Title VI, or does it need to be different for a certain reason? And so I wish we had clearer answers as your staff rather than just turning the question back to you, but I would just say that the confusion's okay. And as intimidating as it is to be kind of charting some of this new territory together, it's also exciting, and there's an opportunity for creativity and learning from what hasn't worked in the past and coming up with the best possible solution that does all the things we've talked about of incorporating voice and input from the community, of being accessible to the community, of being actionable in specific contexts. So I think there's a lot of great ideas shared that I think will be really helpful for us. And I also don't see any other hands up, and I know we're kind of right at the time for the next agenda item. So I might pass it back to Beatriz or Lubna to see if you're ready to move on to the next part of the discussion.
Thank you, Joel. And Lubna, you're going to lead this part of the discussion, correct?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in and see, just I guess I'm gauging with the folks who are in camera for our task force members. Do folks need a break right now before we get into the next section of the agenda? And just as a reminder, kind of the remainder of our meeting will be focused on the recommendations that we started discussing on Saturday. And so we'll be kind of looking at the recommendations specifically related to environmental equity and cumulative impacts. So do folks want to take a quick 5-minute break? Seems like a few thumbs up. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. Let's return, let's do 4:16 p.m. All right, welcome back, folks. And as you come back, if you could just turn your cameras on briefly just to indicate that you are back at your desk. And if you need to have your camera off, that is okay. Okay, I'll just give it another minute or so for folks to come back. All right, I think we have a number of folks back. I just want to make sure, Renee and Beatriz, are you back in the virtual room?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I will go ahead and do a quick screen share. I'm not going to share my screen for too long, but I do want to just let people know kind of what we are looking at and provide a little bit of context. So as many folks know, we did have a conversation on Saturday at the full EJ Action Task Force meeting about recommendations. These are very high-level draft recommendation topics, as well as recurring questions that are popping up in our subcommittees. We broke down that kind of draft recommendations report by subcommittee. And so you can see, and I've dropped the link to this in the chat as well, a PDF of the recommendation topics specifically for the environmental equity and cumulative impacts analysis for this subcommittee. At the top of the page, you'll see language directly from the EJ Action, from the EJ Act, from the statute that is related to this subcommittee. I won't take time to kind of read this aloud. I'll let people kind of follow along on this on their own. Again, the link is in the chat. As you scroll through past the statute language, you'll see a list of recurring questions. You know, who is the equity analysis for? Who do we want to use it, et cetera, et cetera. And then a list of potential recommendations. Again, these recommendations are super high level. And a lot of what we're trying to do is kind of almost get these recommendations to a more like almost SMART recommendations where they're very specific, potentially measurable, you know, time bound, and also moving some of these questions, these recurring questions that we have here to the recommendation section further down. And lastly, there were a few outstanding questions in the EJ Act that we hadn't really touched on too much yet, which I think we are starting to dive into. We spoke about these at the Saturday meeting, and I welcome a conversation around these here today, specifically around cumulative impacts, you know, whether an equity analysis should include an analysis of cumulative impacts, how this type of cumulative impacts analysis should be conducted, and then like the outcome of an equity analysis. Should the equity analysis for permits include an analysis of how to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse impacts that are identified? And, you know, I welcome this space is really meant for people to read through this and have a discussion. So I welcome kind of the awkward pauses and the silence if folks want a few minutes to read through this document and formulate their thoughts. We have until 5:30 today. Public comment does begin at 5 o'clock, which is when we'll welcome input from members of the public. But really, you know, the next 40 minutes or so are a space for the task force members to really contemplate these recommendations and kind of use this as a workshop. Joel is dropping the link again to the PowerPoint into the chat. Another option, and per the suggestion of Renee, an educator who kind of thinks in different ways than I do, Renee suggested kind of creating a Jamboard where folks can provide written comment or recommendations as well. So the first link that Joel is dropping is for the task force members to provide written comment, and I'll do a quick screen share here of this as well, so folks know what I am referring to. Let's see here. So this is kind of what the Jamboard looks like. All members of the task force have the ability to edit these kind of images of these sticky notes. So you would just kind of click in and you can create a text box and write into these spaces that way. And there's several sides of this. Also, Joel is dropping another version of this that is editable for members of the public. So, for our folks that are not on the task force that want to maybe participate in a different way than via public comment, there are some options here. So I will stop there and give folks some time to kind of think through. And again, I would, provide some prompts for a question, but I think there are a lot of questions here in the document, the PDF that has the reoccurring questions and some of the recommendations. And so, if folks want to think of a way to, bite off this conversation piece by piece, again, we welcome that. I know there's a lot here, but we do need to have the space for it and start somewhere. So I'll pause there.
Well, thanks, Levna. This is Trisha, and I've been thinking about this a lot. So I'm happy to get us started, or at least share some of my initial thoughts. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is, we talked Saturday about just the scope of all of the questions that are within the purview of the task force to consider in terms of making recommendations. And I was hearing a little bit of, sort of how are we going to, get our arms around all of that. And it's just been occurring to me that, we don't, while we're invited to, consider recommendations on a broad array of topics, it's also, I think within our purview to decide on priorities, right? What are the areas that we really, want to dive into? And so for me, providing a recommendation on equity analysis is a huge priority to come out of this task force. I would just really hope that we can spend time and energy on this topic. I just think it's super important. In terms of where my thinking is on what a recommendation may be, it's really been evolving through the course of our conversation. I sort of initially was thinking of it from the space of, okay, each agency is going to be needing to do an equity analysis. And so the recommendations are going to need to be around thinking through, when does that agency do an equity analysis? What does the equity analysis look like? How do you approach it? What's the scope of it? But through the course of our conversation, both Saturday and today, these themes of like the need for consistency has come up, right? As well as, and then sort of operation, how to operationalize it, have been on my mind. And I'm sort of coming to this place of, well, if we went in a direction where we were recommending that each agency in different divisions or programs within the agencies were doing their own equity analysis every time they were taking, XYZ type of actions. What does that lead to in terms of consistency or inconsistency, right? Different approaches. And is that helpful for the communities that are, intended to benefit, right? In the document that you were just showing, we all agreed or I guess we've talked about so far is that who should benefit from the equity analysis are the disproportionately impacted communities, but the users of the equity analysis should be the agencies or decision makers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the agencies should also be the creators of the equity analysis, is where my new evolved thinking is going. And there was an idea brought up on Saturday that I've been mulling over a lot. And I've just been thinking about the value of, making a recommendation to the legislature that they embark on, the creation of, maybe it's a third party consultant or somebody else doing equity analyses on a community basis instead of like a facility basis or on a particular permit action basis or a particular rulemaking hearing basis, but really more of a comprehensive, community equity analysis, cumulative impact analysis, and then directing each of the agencies to use that equity analysis in their decision making. And so that's kind of where my thinking has evolved. And so I just wanted to share that, put that out there for reaction or possible, direction in terms of recommendation.
Thank you. That's really helpful because it's also seeing the intersections of injustice and what does that look like? Where does it intersect across agencies too? Not just in definition, but in harm? And how can each agency within start looking at a lot of this just harm with more context of not just historically and what it could be in the future, but how it's impacting now in several different spaces across the board? So I guess intersections are key.
The question that I've also kind of really been asking myself through all these conversations is, when is it too much? Because I know we don't tend to see these different sources of pollution like stacked up against each other and a certain population receiving, multi-source pollutions. When do we come to consensus that this is the limit? This is too much. We can't add more, or there might even be actions where we have to retract sources of pollution, because once you see all these different sources in the same area, then it's like these are dangerous levels of pollution. And if we start to find those situations too, is like, what is the action? Because I'm sure we might find communities in our state where it's like, this is way too much. When is the point when we say enough is enough? And then there's also a moratorium, or I don't know what's like the recommended action once we come to the conclusion through these studies that it's these communities are overburdened, and we can no longer expect these pollutions to be able to, at a human safe level, continue to receive any more sources of pollution.
That's super interesting, Beatrice. For what it's worth, like from a water quality perspective, there is like that framework exists actually, right? So there's this framework of assessing our water bodies for, when are they stressed beyond like levels that they're not supporting the uses that they need to, right? And when that exists, then we put together like a plan that says okay, it's too much, no additional stuff can be allowed, and how do we start to do mitigation and clean up in those kinds of situations. So I like that.
if I can just add a little bit to that, I really like both what both of you are saying, but also along the same lines, like we would then have to look at existing water impacts along with the existing air impacts, land impacts, et cetera, to really get a complete view of the cumulative impacts. And so just kind of wanted to make sure that's out there and clear.
And if we start standardizing this, because I know there's a lot of also conversations in terms of how much it costs and time it costs agencies. The way that I like to think about it when we standardize it is in that we're not putting the burden on different agencies to continue to do these studies, and maybe and that's also fiscally responsible, right? Because it's a lot of work. It costs money, and how are we making sure that it's not more work for agencies? It's not costing the Colorado people more money. If some of these studies are already done, then we can kind of build upon those and reuse them as much as possible, because again, that's the most cost-effective way to do this and not put permitting into longer or processes. If we have a good database, then it benefits permitting going faster, it's less expensive, we're all speaking the same language. So I think that's another really important factor to all of this as well.
And I guess that's key too. Thank you, Beatriz, for saying that. This will benefit everybody by recognizing that we need to assess those that are most impacted. And it's helping that this is designed to form equity for all of those instances and all of the range after, not just disproportionately impacted communities, but everything that is impacted afterwards too. So ultimately, it really does it helps everyone to, I guess, strengthen these type of agencies to see community engagement as not just a recommendation, but a form of implementation.
I think that brings up a really important point, which is how after the equity analysis is completed, how it's incorporated into agency decision making. That's not something that really factors into the legislative language as far as I'm aware, but I think it's a really important question that we as a task force should address. So, so you've completed an equity analysis. So an equity analysis is required as part of various types of decision making. Then how must it be considered? How must the agency making this decision incorporate that into their decision? And Beatrice, when you talk about how much is too much, I think it gets to that question of, if the equity analysis finds that pollution impacts, hit a certain level, or maybe a standard that is much less quantitative than that, what is the point at which we say no?
I also have been thinking of another thing. I want to pose another question that I think Tyson isn't here anymore, but it's a lot of his comments about affordability and caring about the end user and customers is really important. And I honestly, I take that to heart. But the thing that I'm thinking too is through our equity analysis, is there a way to incorporate the cost and the burden of cumulative impacts of pollution on community? What is that cost to those individuals? And then what is the cost to Colorado, right? What is the cost to taxpayers to have people having to have negative health impacts. And I think that's also a very compelling aspect of this, because I know from a utility standpoint, we're trying to keep the cost down so people can have affordable energy. And I really appreciate that. And that is very important for disproportionately impacted communities. But I think there also has to be a balance on what is Jaime brings this up a lot too, right? What is the cost of health, and how can we quantify that? And then what is the cost, the overall cost to the taxpayer at the end of the day too, to be able to absorb those health impacts to those communities? Because some of it might be personal, but some of it, we're all carrying it together. Those burdens of cost of pollution as well. So then there has to be a balance between, yes, having affordable industries being to provide everything from affordable energy, affordable transportation that will benefit, families, working class people. But then if there's a side cost of making our health and our healthcare extremely expensive, then it's a wash, right? We're not really reaping the benefits of that very affordable source of energy if we're paying it in another place. And a lot of times that also comes to, the state and all of us as taxpayers having to pay for that as well. So what's that balance, right? To get, yes, affordable energy, and yes, healthy people that don't have these burdens of health, and we all have to pay for that.
Yeah, absolutely, Beatrice. And I think to take that even further, we can talk about what we're doing right now with electric vehicles. I mean, it's, it is a fact that we are going to be adding load to our generation plants. And when you talk about where we've got focused emissions and focused things happening on certain communities, we've heard from Ian, and we've heard from those who live near the Commerce City plant, that those are highly impacted areas. Well, what do you think you're doing when you're adding all these electric vehicles? You're taking it off the highway corridors, but you're replacing it somewhere else. So again, how those impacts are made by making these decisions. The biggest issue that I have with this is, I thought it was great that we added air and emission standards to oil and gas. I think it was well needed, but why did we only do it to oil and gas? Why was it only done in one sector? And why is that focus always been on one thing that, if you actually put the data together, is 0.1% of the emission issues? There's a thought process that must be gone through with all these agencies to make sure that they're doing this right and doing this correctly, and not doing this for a political or industry or some other motivated reason. And I think that's the piece that we need to think about when we're protecting the disproportionately impacted communities. I don't think, we may set an example that they can use for everybody else, but I think our goal and our purpose here is to make sure that we find a way that the disproportionately impacted communities can be heard, and make sure that their interests are protected in their communities. And I think that's again, when you think of the broader, I do understand that there's a broader issue, there's a bigger issue, but for the purpose of why we are here, it is really to find a way to protect those communities that many times don't have the means, the money, the means, the people to protect themselves.
Raised, but I just want to jump in real quickly to correct something. It's not just the oil and gas sector that's being regulated. The electricity sector has an 80% target by 2030. The industrial sector is being regulated through multiple AQCC rulemaking. So it's not just oil and gas.
Well, I think it was but oil and gas was brought to 95% attainment in relatively short period. And it wasn't, I mean, when you talk about GHG emissions, no, it has not touched many of the largest emitters of those things. And I do understand that they're planning on doing that, and and the EPA stuff will help. And the stuff that we're doing here will help as well. But what I'm saying is it really had nothing to do with oil and gas. It has to do with making sure that we're focusing on protecting what we're here to protect. And that's, I think, the key element that we need to keep in mind here, because again, the broader fight is too polarized, and there's a lot of decisions that aren't being made correctly for anybody. But the one thing that we can do is we can help protect the DI communities.
I just wanted to, I guess, agree with and thank Beatriz for bringing that up. In Pueblo, we have increased, and I imagine in a lot of other disproportionately impacted communities, we have increased healthcare costs and insurance rates because of our disproportionate impacts from pollution and various forms of pollution. And so I think that's an important thing to consider, the social costs of climate change. And as we do so, I think it's also important to consider the fact that the fossil fuel industry, regardless of whether we're talking about oil and gas or coal, has for decades lied to the public about the effects of fossil fuels on the climate. And so, when we talk about what we're here to, what this task force is here to do, it's really to correct that and to, bring about the changes necessary so that communities like mine aren't seeing disproportionate impacts on our health, decreased life expectancy, increased medical and medical insurance rates, and those kind of impacts. And I think that when we're focusing so much on industry and agency, we're totally missing the point.
And I mean, I guess that was my point, is we need to not focus. I mean, we can talk about all the other issues. The point really was we need to focus on the DI communities, period. Not industries, not, the president's climate change actions, not this party's actions, not that party's actions. We need to focus on the DI communities, period, and make sure that we come up with stuff that protects the people in those communities. Because in my own personal opinion, the legislators are not, the public health is not, they're doing things to try and improve an overall aspect of it. But again, how much the DI communities have been, there's no nice ways to put it, but have been really just an afterthought, and have been over egregiously not thought of in the past, has really created something that no bipartisan one party or another party is going to fix. But we have an opportunity to make an impact on that.
I don't mean to sound too harsh, but state and federal agencies have been incompetent to disproportionately impact the communities thus far. And we need to recognize that if we go back to the status quo, we are catering to that. And we legitimately need to stop. It needs to involve more community perspectives with health and safety context. And ironically, that's what their position was supposed to do, but it's out of touch. And it's recognizing that it's okay to have made that mistake, but it's not okay to continue it. And it wasn't okay to make the mistake, in all honesty, either, because there's a lot of people and a lot of generations that have been harmed that no, we're representing still now, and we're speaking for. And thank you, Jamie. It's more money to be poor. So they can't be here to speak for themselves because of a number of range of cumulative impacts.
Really see, building off of previous comments, I really see the equity analysis component as building accountability and building power within communities that don't currently have a seat at the table. It is very easy for industry, for regulated facilities to get a seat at the table. I think we need to think about going forward how this equity analysis ultimately builds power with disproportionately impacted communities that have not had a say in these agency decisions. And that involves thinking about what goes into an equity analysis, but it also involves thinking about how that is utilized, both by the communities and by the agency.
Yeah, I think when I looked at that document that Lenma brought up, where did it go? I have it pulled up somewhere. The environmental equity and cumulative impacts draft recommendations. The very first of the recurring questions is, who is the equity analysis for? And it struck me that, I think a lot of us see that question and we're thinking of it as who, which agencies is it supposed to apply to? But it also applies to who is it for? It's for the disproportionately impacted communities. That's what this whole thing is for. And so, yeah, I just want to once again say how much I agree with what Beatriz was talking about the social impacts of climate change and pollution, and how, doing, I guess, kind of going to what Renee just said, continuing to coddle government agency and industry is exactly what got us in here. And we're not going to be able to get ourselves out of here by doing the same thing. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of creativity and work at the drawing board to figure out how to implement some of this stuff. But it has to be done. We can't go on living like this. Like I said, we have this decreased life expectancy in my community, and that's not okay to continue on. So it's never easy to make change, but that's what we need to do.
So something that I've kind of, to Jamie's point, that I've been thinking about is like, who is our audience? I was in a meeting where they were explaining to me how in certain communities, when they were rolling out the COVID vaccine, the audience were children, because children translate for their parents. I had never thought of this. And I was shocked to think medical health information has to be given to a child and created so a child can explain to their parents what is happening, because this is not my lived experience, but realizing that this is a reality for communities, I think it's really important that we try to imagine different personas in these communities. And yes, we have a legislator, and that's a persona. Yes, we have an agency, and that is a persona. Yes, we have advocacy groups, that's a different persona. And then there's also the community. And this is, human-centered design, where we are making the information available to all people and to industry for that purpose too, right? Let's say we have, a nuclear plant, and they're thinking about this form of energy, and that plant and that industry, they might realize this is a disproportionately impacted community, and they could not go and start this facility there. They must go find another community where they locate this area, because this community, you can no longer burden this community. So I think it also helps industry decide where facilities are going to go, because we know by redlining that industrial permitting and low-income communities were put next to each other. And as we're moving forward, it's like, this is already overburdened. Now we need to find new industrial areas or create new spaces for some of these technologies. And I'm not saying I'm in favor of nuclear. All I'm saying is, here's an example of an industry that is looking to go into a disproportionately impacted community and yet put more burden on certain communities. So I think this will also be really helpful for industry to be able to locate those facilities in places that will not overburden these same communities.
So I would 100% agree with Jamie and Tyson that the disproportionately impacted communities are the main focus. That's got to be the main focus. That's what we're here to try to help and address. I would ask, how are we going to accomplish that? Because it seems the best way for us to accomplish that, or how the task force has been laid out, is making these recommendations, whether they be legislative recommendations or policy recommendations to the various agencies as our tools to protect the DI communities, and keeping that at the forefront. But I'm trying to figure out, well, how do we best protect them without engaging in some of the process there? And I completely understand some of the frustrations with various government agencies, and believe me, I've been frustrated with the feeling walking away from sometimes just weren't even considered or didn't get a fair shake at things. So, but I also want to know and recognize that they're made up of humans, right? Our fellow folks from Colorado, and I know folks like Tricia and Robin Wiley, and I know how much they care, and I know how hard they work to try to make it a better state and protect everybody that exists here in our space. And so, I'm trying to figure out how I can make kind of specific recommendations to help kind of get us to these really strong, meaningful recommendations that can be implemented and be successful and accomplish our goals. And right now, I'm trying to listen to everybody, because I think it's important that the communities speak first. And what I'm trying to do is just process and react and understand how, why workers are part of those very same communities, that piece of it is kind of woven into those considerations as well.
I posted in the chat a little bit, and I thank you, Beatriz, for looking at it in that way. It's literally in calling in the directions too. It's recognizing different context, youth in the space, elders in the space, how many women, how many men, and even other communities as well too. Because we're trying to build, the more context you build, the more perspective you build. And it helps recognizing to where there's those gaps as well. And that's why you need community to understand, how is a community connected? Where are communities being able to facilitate, whether it's information or support to each other or not? And what does that look like when we're coming in to try to support them in a way that's legitimately not going to hijack their narrative, but from their own self-determination, say, this is what has been harming our communities. This is where we continually have disparities. This is where the barrier continues. So it's, again, recognizing barriers too, and trying to find as many contexts as you can to eliminate them.
Thanks all. This has been a really fruitful discussion. And, I'm thinking about next steps and how to get us in a place of, numerous questions and these really high level recommendation topics that we've outlined and kind of put before you. I kind of want to talk a little bit through some process questions and see if it would be okay for us to, as your staff, kind of come up with more recommendations or more refined recommendations based on the conversations that we're hearing today. And in the wake of, the conversations that happened on Saturday. We also welcome any written feedback. Again, I know at least for how I work, I mean, everybody has different work styles, but kind of reading through the document and maybe setting aside some time to write some written recommendations and sending us those, we welcome that. Between now and the meeting that happens in late May, I think, you know, what we will plan to do as your staff is just kind of refine those recommendations and then share them out with you again prior to the meeting. Any thoughts on that, or like suggestions on how you would prefer a different process? Or does that sound okay? And you can just thumbs up if that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay, so with that said, I know that we received a couple of notifications from Marcia, and so Joel, did you want to touch base on that and or Marcia?
Sure, I'm happy to, or Marcia, please feel free to speak up. But Marcia shared with us that she has actually recently done a presentation on Title VI and has some really helpful slides that could be useful for the other task force members. And so I think we can, maybe Marcia, you can tell us a little more, and we can try to upload those to the public drive if it's okay, so other task force members can learn from them.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Joel. You know, I'm not an official member of this subcommittee. I am on the task force, but I kind of chime in every now, or try to come in every now and then to learn as much as I can. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcia Nelson. I'm the new Chief Equity Officer for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And as part of 260, I'm tied into the new branch of Equity and Environmental Justice for that department. So I came in December, and, you know, really my whole goal coming in was to intentionally just listen. My goal is to listen and to build relationships. And I think it was the first day I started, I was appointed to be on this task force, which I think started, Lubna, I think we had that conversation the first week, my first day, and the first meeting was that following week. So coming in very green. But in terms of my background, I did start off in the construction industry over 20 years ago. I'm not going to age myself, but well over 20 years ago. And so the world of Title VI, the world of small business contracting, as well as community engagement and outreach is something that has been my life work. I do call myself a servant leader. As a woman of color who represents both the Black and Asian community, who lives in a disproportionate community, who has been affected by the disparities. I'm in a unique position where I now work for a state agency, right? And so I love the opportunity that I can now be a spokesperson, not only for the community that I represent, right? And having these lived experiences, but looking at the agency to ensure we are doing all of our best and the best that we can do to ensure we're not furthering impacts to these communities. I love everything that I've heard today. I did a recent Transportation Commissioner's presentation, I think it was last week on 4/20. And earlier in this conversation, we were talking about Title VI and the different varying regulations that we have. And in my presentation, I shared with Joel, it's a unique position because we have a number of different regulations with varying and similar definitions. And so how do we take all of these regulations as an agency, and all of the agencies are faced with this challenge. And I just wanted to kind of show that visually to everyone. I think Joel's going to take those slides and put them in the folder for everyone. But when you look at it, you'll see it's kind of a hodgepodge of everything. How do we take those definitions that are federally mandated or state mandated and make them consistent and uniform for whether it's one agency or all of our agencies together? You know, Joel and I have had a number of conversations. I agree that a lot of agencies can do better in terms of collaborative work. And so I really hope to work with CDPHE and other agencies across the state to ensure we're doing everything we can the right way to not further impacts for our communities. So when you see that, if you have questions, just certainly let me know, but he'll put that in the folder for all of you.
Thank you so much, Marsha. And I'm uploading it right now, so I'll share the link in a moment. And just to be clear, Marsha, should I upload the full presentation or just the kind of handful of slides that are focused on Title VI?
Totally up to you, whatever
Okay,
you want. I think it's really just, I wanted to show like it's kind of like, it's a beautiful mess of just a lot of regulations and what do they all mean, right? They have similar context and voice. So how do we take it all together? And I think all of us serving on this task force have a really great opportunity because the decisions we make today, they have to outlive all of us, every single one of us. And I was actually driving, and so I wasn't able to talk about who I was accountable to. So if it's okay, I'll share, right? Like for me, again, talking with my background, I hold myself accountable to the community, to the state, to the greater good of everyone. But I take it even further to say, I hold myself accountable even nationally. I think all of our state agencies can leverage and use the knowledge and experience across the country. What have we done well? What can we improve and work together with? And understanding that it's not just a siloed process. I should be looking beyond that. So when it comes to accountability, it's everyone. It's a national effort for all of us. And again, the most important that the decisions we all make today on this task force and beyond it's a generational impact, right? We know that it's affected us negatively. Now it's our opportunity to make it better for the generations above us and to outlive us and our children.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marsha, and thank you for those resources. I think, once folks have a chance to review those, I think they could help inform further discussions and our conversation in May. With that said, I do want to open it up for public comment. I think the best way to do this is maybe by raise of hand if you would like to provide public comment. I know that we have a couple of folks. Oh, and it looks like Juan dropped off. I think Juan had a comment. Maybe he'll be back. And we did receive a written public comment today from Anna. And so welcome you kind of sharing that public comment further. And I will drop, I'll actually drop a link in the chat for the written public comment that was submitted. Oh, thanks. On top of it, Joel, thank you. And so if Anna or other folks that would like to provide public comment at this time, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call you in the order that we see your hand raised. Yes, Jorge.
Thank you so much. I just want to really focus my comments on just how grateful I am for the work that you guys are doing. I had never met the task force, and I've been just hearing the conversation, and I just want to just commend you for the work that you're doing and how seriously you're taking the task. I have one public comment related to data and equity, and I don't know if this is like the right forum, the subgroup to mention it, but I don't know whether I'm going to have another opportunity to speak to the task force. I'm very worried about fire and the haze of wildfire. I feel that if we are really committed to air quality, to clean air in, for example, Denver's under-resourced communities and many other places, it's inevitable for us to deal with like the sources of wildfire, especially those that are outside of our state. And so I just want to suggest an idea of doing like an observatory. It's a concept used in Mexico and other places. I think it's starting to get traction here in the United States in several places. But the concept of the observatory is like an observatory that looks, instead of looking at the stars, it looks down around the city or the region. And the idea is to get different institutions that are good, that are well respected, and that are invested in science and data to develop like research agendas to certain topics for the observatory, for example, equity and wildfire haze, or equity and land use, and then look at trends, develop a research agenda, and also look at trends and observe the trends and develop policies based on the trends. And so that's the concept of it. I think like with wildfire could be more disruptive than COVID-19 to cities in the future, in terms of masks, in terms of like really disrupting our just way of life. And that we need to figure out how to do it. And I know that ASEAN, ASEAN, Asian Country Coalition, dealt with the out of jurisdiction wildfires coming from Indonesia into Singapore. And so there are models of coalitions of city governments and state governments that have come together to like really tackle the sources of air pollution coming from outside of a country's or a city's jurisdiction. And yeah, I just want to mention that there are models, that an observatory could be a good solution to like really get everybody together to like look at trends and develop research agenda, and then use those trends and that data to help inform, whether to incentivize certain trends or mitigate certain trends. And that was just my my suggestion. Both congratulations for what you're doing, and also like the issue of wildfire is such an important thing. And I just wanted also to mention the solution of the observatory. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my comments. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jorge. Any thoughts or comments, clarifying questions from the task force members? Yeah, Tricia.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you right back to you, Jorge, and for your time and the work that you're doing with the Environmental Justice Advisory Board. That is really important work. And also just for your extra time here to, find the synergies between the two and share your thoughts. It's extremely valuable. So thank you so much for that.
And I think Lubna and Joe would be happy for me to also state that this is my position as a citizen of Colorado, as a resident, and this is not like the perspective of the board.
And I think, Jorge, there is a federal effort through the EPA. What is it? CSPAR, where it's like the states, kind of like Oregon, California, Colorado, we're all a part of it, of how air quality is being impacted by wildfires. So I know there's already starting, some of those conversations are starting between states. And I'll get that information to you, Joel, as well, at a federal level, and maybe we can look into that a little bit. But thank you, Jorge.
Thanks, Jorge. JD. JD, did you want to provide public comment?
Yeah. Just so you know, I'm just one. But if we're going to include the idea of what the smoke does, my sister, I in Canada, She had to be evacuated twice. También mi familia allá en West Mexico también. My aunt, has to be in the house because she can't breathe because of fires that are there. So if we're going to be considering where the fire's coming from, wherever else, got to consider the impact that it's having on the people within those areas también. And just not trying to say that, oh, it comes from over there. Realize that it's affecting families, it's affecting entire communities. Right now in New Mexico, the Apache Ceremonial Center is gone. You know, these things are affecting everybody. So when we're trying to isolate it, let's not just say, oh, the smoke's coming from over there or whatever. Understand that it involves people también, you know, people that are being heartbroken. And one thing my sister wanted me to tell you guys, and I never did because I didn't think it was appropriate. She said, you tell them I'm suffering from, como you said, CD, that CEDO, whatever that is, you know, traumatic stress or whatever. She says, tell him that when you get evacuated, you have your purse, you have everything right there, but you still forget it. She said, it's nothing that you want to go through. You know, these are true human causes. So I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot of loss that we're doing. And then now we're on a subject of fires. You know, look at that I just put in the chat. The whole farming industry, the whole Colorado, Kansas, Utah, they're all the farming is designated as I can't remember that area, but anyway, they're all bad. You know, we're really losing. And then, so if everybody just bears with me for one moment, I'd like to go back just for a moment when they said, you know, I can't remember how the wording is, and I don't want to try to find it, you know, how it impacts individuals. You know, when you guys see me frustrated, I want to let you know, first off, I sincerely appreciate all the opportunities that I'm allowed to speak here. I've seen the fight go on through cigarettes, asbestos, and a lot of other stuff. And you can actually, I'm not kidding you, verbatim from what the city officials say or elected officials say today, what they said back then was the same thing. And that's why I really feel proud that when I see everybody here, there's some momentum moving forward, and I really feel proud. But understand me, because my anxiety, because when I see it, all I feel is that angst, and I say, no, without me. And I say this, because I mean that in a good way, because yo soy viejito, you know, so I don't mean nothing derogatory. I mean it in a good way. Because I don't want you to make the same excuses that I do, that I've made, you know, because we've done this before. So just understand, when I lose my composure, have patience with me, okay? Because I think this is an effort that needs to be there. And so last night when we had the air quality, it was almost a shame the way that they were treating everybody. You know, there was somebody made a comment. Let me start here. The communities have actually found confidence in Colavando and Dr. Detlev helping with their air monitoring. So when we actually have the state come in and they start talking about how things are, and it was mentioned, and then some of the people, the decision makers said, oh, no, we can't use him because Detlev's actually utilizing, he takes different samples. ¿Qué es this? ¿Qué dice? Are you saying that we're dumb people, or what are you saying? All you have to do is tell them to start looking for that stuff. So when you guys are talking about all that list that you're going through, understand that there are some groups and some entities that they've already earned confidence within these groups. And if you insist on using people that are actually kind of questionable or haven't earned trust or something like that, it's going to fall apart. If you come into communities, at least say, hey, Colavando, Ivan, there they are. They're really good. And just consider that as we move forward, because I think that's very important. You know, and then another thing to prove it with that air quality thing, Karen herself, she proved that and I don't mean to say you guys, but the entities that are actually charged with protecting these groups, and I'm talking about Weld County, she was showing how she even called the state and they tried to do this. Oh, and all they tell her all the time is, oh, we'll look into it. So understand that frustration, okay? Pero aquí, right here, with this group here, I'm not lying right now. I got goosebumps because man, I can feel you guys holding the ground. I can feel you saying, no, this is it. We're gonna make sure that this goes beyond generations, because guess what? My generation, we didn't think about the next generation. So just know my pride is there. Hang with me when I get frustrated, but I wanna be here. I wanna attend these meetings because I'm getting old, and I just feel like I left you, this generation, in a bad spot. And I just want to be proactive with it. That's all. Thank you guys. I really feel honored to be part of this group.
Thank you, JD. And I welcome any task force members that would like to just comment or reflect on JD's comments. And I see that there's some comments in the chat.
I appreciate you so much, JD. Thank you for being consistently here as you are. It's remembering that when we're talking about sensitivity, you are who we're talking about. It is your family that you're talking about. It's the context that you bring. So you are a crucial member already. And I'm really grateful for all the work that you've already have done in holding space for us to come. That's what really, you have been already taking care of future generations if you're still mindfully here now. So I thank you for being a good ancestor in that space, for being completely consistent, and for representing your community as authentically as you can and your family as authentically as you do.
Any other members of the public that would like to provide public comment that have not already? Right, I just want to give folks an opportunity again. We did receive this written public comment today, which is now on our shared Google Drive. And we do want to keep the public comment window open. We have about 12 minutes remaining. If folks want to take a moment to kind of read through that public comment, I welcome that at this time. And if you all feel like this is a space that you would like to share or discuss regarding that, I welcome that as well. In between now and 5:30, if there are other members of the public that would like to raise their hand and provide a statement, you're more than welcome. JD, I see that your hand is raised.
No, and I think we're all already aware of this. Particularly the communities that we're dealing with. A lot of times, even me, sometimes I get nervous to talk. So I'm glad we have these times. So I ask that you be patient, when we come up, in particular, if somebody answers, they put their hand up and it takes them a little bit to acknowledge. Because trying to establish the trust and everything is going to be there. So when you said that you're going to offer this time, I think it's nice, but the silence was just almost, I just felt that, sometimes when even I talk to elders, it takes them a moment sometimes when you ask them a question to say something, and sometimes they respond in a way that's really quite unexpected. So allowing the time like this where people can just contemplate for a little bit, I think it's pretty nice. But I'm gonna try to do my best that I can do to help. Pass the word that there are folks that can be trusted now within these governmental entities. Because you have to understand, a lot of us really have, even in this group right here who's sitting here, we've been harmed by some of the decisions by our elected officials and such. So right now I'm going to start doing my best to go out and talk to people, because I think the trust that you're demonstrating here, I think it has to be sent out. But on the same time, remember last night, I think there was a lot of trust that was actually lost, because the way with the air quality, the way that I felt, this is my perspective only, okay? So don't take it personal. Don't think I'm speaking for nobody out there. But I felt very discouraged by that, the way that they were talking, and I think it takes just one time for everything to fall down. But I'm going to do the best I can, because yeah, we're doing it. We're doing it. What am I saying? You guys are doing it. I'm just sitting here. It's your guys' fault, okay? But yeah, I appreciate allowing the time. That's actually all I wanted to say, but I got going. I'm sorry. Anda.
Thanks, JD. And thanks for the reminder, Renee. Thanks for pointing that out in the chat, that there is space for folks that might just not feel like they would, want to come off mute and provide a verbal comment. There's a couple different avenues now. You can always email our CDPHE email, cdphe_EJ at state.co.us. And you can also, for this meeting, we've created the Jamboard for members of the public to participate that way as well. And I see there's a couple of comments already in that kind of PowerPoint. So just as a reminder for folks that they can participate that way. We do have about 7 minutes left. I wanted to check in with our task force members and see if this is valuable for you all to kind of take some time. There were a couple things that we mentioned, including the comment in the chat, which has been uploaded to the Google Drive. Do people like the opportunity to take time to kind of read that and then check in around it at this time, or would anybody like to adjourn early?
I actually need to jump off a couple minutes early to start another meeting that I facilitate right after this. So if that factors in.
So I'm
okay with
good. I was gonna say I'm good with whatever the group decides. My next meeting's not until 6 o'clock, and after some of JD's comments, I'd be more than happy to stand on until 5:30 at least to see if anybody has anything else they'd like to say.
True. I can stay on for anything.
Before I have to go, I would just like to say thank you to all of our community members who are here with us and those who have provided input. You are really vital to this this task force, this subcommittee, and to the work that we're trying to do. So thank you all for spending your time with us. And we know time is very valuable, so it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Beatriz.
All right. Thanks all. It seems like a number of folks are logging off. And Joel, I saw you come off mute for a moment. I wasn't sure if there was something that you wanted to share before we made adjourn.
Yeah, nothing too important. I just wanted to let the task force members know we did email Mr. Madrid, who raised his hand to give a comment earlier, and sort of make sure he knew that the comment period was still happening since he jumped off the meeting. So it's like maybe he had a conflict. He hasn't responded to the email, but we did try to reach out with him, and if he provides a written comment and response, we'll obviously upload it to the file. So.
Great. So one thing I just want to note is that we had tentatively scheduled our next equity analysis subcommittee meeting for May 25th. That is at the same day that there's another hearing, and so we might want to move the date for that subcommittee meeting. So just a heads up around that is subject to change, even though it was just scheduled today. So sorry about that confusion. And yeah, lastly, as we wrap up, I just do again want to thank our interpreters for interpreting during the duration of this meeting. Maria Lisa and Gisela, thank you so much for all of your efforts. All right, if there are no other comments or questions, we're almost at the hour, and I think we can wrap up. And thank you to Renee for helping facilitate this meeting, and Joel, you as well. All right. Great, thanks, Renee. Well, that's a wrap. We will convene, and just please look out for an email with that updated calendar invitation for the next meeting time. Thanks all.